वन्दे गुरुपरम्परा।
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. This is our second session. In the first session, I shared my teaching plan with all of you. We are going to cover these texts. And then we also studied the basic terms, which are technical terms of Navya Nyaya or the Neologic school. Here also we need to do, in this video, we need to do the same thing. Here is the final definition of pervasion offered by Gangesha. Now look here. The definition is presented in terms of a few technical words or ideas. Which are those? One is, why is not limited by whatever. Now limitation is one technical idea. And it's also very unique in Nyaya. Another idea is counterpositiveness. Here, the counterpositiveness is actually the absential counterpositiveness. We will definitely define it after some time. And then also we have this word determines, right? So determination is another technical idea we need to understand. If we understand these three, I think we will do a good job, and then we will be able to understand the definition. Sorry. So the first thing is limitation or avachedanam. What is a limiter? It is either a property or a relation. The question is, why is it required? First, we talk about a limiting property. When x qua z becomes y, z-ness becomes the limiting property of y-ness. In this case, y-ness is an adventitious property. It is not essential to x. But z-ness, that is the limiting property in the definition, must be an essential property. An example will add clarity to this. A stick has many properties such as stickness, substanceness, entityness, solidness, and so on. But when a stick qua stick causes a part, stickness becomes the limiter of causeness in the stick, because stickness is the relevant property. Other properties in this case are not relevant. If I want to make a pot, and if I ask you to bring me the causal things, causal elements, it'll bring me something that qualifies as a stick. Otherwise, I cannot work. Now, the point here is the stick is also a substance, but you do not just bring me any substance. You bring me a stick. This is a stick qua stick. In Aristotelian logic, we have this term qua. It's like qualification. In this case, stickness qualifies the stick as a causal factor for a pot. This is the most important point here. Therefore, stickness as a property is a limiter of the causeness that resides in the stick in this case. Similarly, the effectness that belongs to the pot is limited by potness. Once again, the cognition, the relevant cognition here is a stick causes a pot. Here, take A as a universal quantifier. So basically, we are trying to say that a stick in general causes a pot in general. We are not talking about a specific stick. We will now talk about it pictorially. Here is a stick which has causeness, which is an adventitious property. Also, it has stickness, which is an essential property. And in this case, stickness limits causeness. Or rather, stickness limits the causeness that belongs to the stick here. And similarly, the pot is our effect here, and potness. So when we are making a pot is also a substance or a solid entity. But when we are making a pot, we are not making any substance, right? We are making a pot. Once again, the relevant property as far as the effectness is concerned is potness, not substanceness, not other things, right? It is not a spherical object. Of course, it is. A pot is a spherical object, but the shape is not our concern here, because anything having a spherical shape does not qualify as a pot, in this case as our effect. Therefore, potness limits the effectness that belongs to the pot here. When we talk about, at least in the beginning, we kind of repeat what we say, because while doing all these things, we are never sure whether we are making sense. So please forgive me for doing that, for my repetitions and all that. The next idea, as I said, is determination. The formulation here is this: a pair of mutually dependent properties such as x and y determine each other. What an example would be the causeness and effectness pair. Why are they mutually dependent? Here is the reason. There is no cause if there is no effect, and vice versa. There is no effect if there is no cause, right? So in a sense, effectness arises depending on causeness. And the reverse is also true. The same thing applies to the locusness-locatiness pair. And once again, the same thing applies to an absence and its counterpositiveness. We're going to explain counterpositiveness here, a very rough explanation. A counterpositive is just an absentee, the thing that is absent from a locus. So the property of being an absentee or a counterpositive, absential counterpositive is counterpositiveness. Once again, there is no absence without an absentee, and vice versa. These two properties, like in each case, the pair, determine each other. This, I think, will be very clear in this picture. Look at our case of stick and pot. The causeness here depends on effectness, and it also determines effectness. And the reverse is also true. Another thing which is very important from the representational perspective. In this case, determination works as a thread also, as a conceptual thread. We are talking about one event, right? The event of making a pot. Something is a cause and something is an effect. And the causeness is limited by some property, in this case, stickness, and also the effectness is limited by another property, in this case, that is potness. But then there must be some element to bind the causeness and the effectness. Otherwise, how is it that here the stick causes the pot? What is the binding factor? That is determination here in this case. So conceptually, it is about the mutual dependence, and logically speaking, it actually binds the two dependent properties. That happens everywhere. So in our technical language, we can say the effectness that resides in the pot is limited by potness and is determined by the causeness which resides in the stick and is limited by stickness. The picture makes it sort of clearer. So we can see that the effectiveness in the pot is limited by potness and is determined by the causeness which resides in the stick and which is limited by stickness. And also the reverse is true. The causeness that resides in the stick is limited by stickness and is determined by the effectiveness which resides in the pot and is limited by potness. Actually, determination is a symmetric relation, and we can see that here. Sorry. Now we will talk about the limiting relation. We have seen limiting properties, now limiting relations. Let's consider an example. Suppose S cognizes that X is in Y. In S's cognition, X appears to have a specific property and a specific relation with Y. For example, look at this picture. A pot is there on the ground. Not only that, what is implicit here is a pot is there on the ground through the relation of contact, because it's not some other relation, it's not identity, right? It's not inherence, but it is contact. Here the locality, which is the pot, appears as a pot, appears inside the cognition, right? It is a content of the cognition, and it appears as a pot, which means it appears as something having potness. Thus, potness limits the locatedness or vrittitva or adhiyatva residing in the pot. Also, the pot is cognized to hold the relation of contact with the ground. Thus, the locatedness is limited by contact also, right? So it has two limiters, a property limiter and a relation limiter. We shall now say the locatedness residing in the pot is limited by both potness and contact. So in the technical language of the Nyaya school, it will be something like this. Samyoga sambandhavachinna ghatattvavachinna adhiyatvam ghatanishtham. Now, we will talk about limitation in the inferential context. Suppose somebody infers fire on a hill from smoke. In this case, in their inference, smoke becomes the reason, the hetu. Although smoke has many properties such as smokeness, substanceness, colored objectness, etc. Here, smoke qua smoke becomes the reason. So when I look at smoke, I do not just look at any substance, right? I look at a thing qua smoke and then I infer fire there. Therefore, the limiting property of smoke is smokeness. And also look at the form of the cognition. That is, the hill has fire since it has smoke. Now, once again, it relates the reason with the sight, with the inferential sight, which is the hill. It relates, my cognition relates the reason with the sight. And now the very relation also, which is contact in this case, the relation of contact, appears in my cognition. So I must qualify this very location of smoke in the hill in terms of two limiters. One, smokeness, which is the property limiter, and also contact, which is the relation limiter. The last bit, the last segment we need to understand, it is absence. There is a pot on the ground. We can see that in the picture. And there is no pot in the hill. Now, let's denote the absence of pot by this sign, this thing, we can now say that the absence of pot is there in the hill. And what is the counterpositive or the absentee of that stipulated absence? It must be the pot, right? Or the pot in general. Therefore, the pot has a property which is in this case an adventitious property, which is counterpositiveness, the property of being a counterpositive. And it is limited by potness. Why so? Because our cognition is there is no pot on the ground. Here, of course, pots are, like, I will sort of bring this several times because it's so very important. But we can see that it's very important to understand this idea. A pot is also a substance, also an entity, also a solid thing, also an entity with a specific shape and all that stuff. But not all these things are being relevant in this case, right? Only potness is being relevant. Only by having potness does it become the counterpositive of the absence we are talking about. And also our cognition has a relation, which is the relation of contact, because we say that there is no pot on the ground. There is no pot in the hill through the relation of contact, right? So both appear in our cognition. Now we must remember that the absence is there in its locus, which is in this case the hill. But the counterpositive which determines the absence is there in the counterpositive, right? Which is there in the pot. So the absence and its counterpositive do not coexist. They're always, they exist in different loci. This is very, very important to understand. And by using this idea, we may also define this unique absence. We can define it as the absence of pot in general. So that can be the nickname of it, but the formal identity of it will be the absence determined by the counterpositiveness limited by potness and contact. Now notice here, pots are absent from the hill with respect to the relation of contact when they are there in that very hill through other relations. So what are those other relations? This is a very, very important point as far as the Nyaya framework is concerned. Why so? Because there is an assumption in the Nyaya system that everything exists in time and non-eternal objects. What is a non-eternal object? A product, something with a beginning. Everything exists in time and a product through the temporal relation. Why so? The understanding, the assumption is kalaha sarvadharaha. So time is the locus for everything, and because the product is a temporal object. See, eternal objects are not temporal. Why not? Because they're not bound by time, right? But a product is always a temporal object. It is born. In a sense, it is caused by time. So it is a child of time, so temporal. So in that sense, like, we need not examine this assumption, but it's very important in order to understand the Nyaya framework. Therefore, we are talking about it. So although there is no pot in the hill through the relation of contact, all the pots are there in that hill through the temporal relation. So it all depends on the relation we are talking about. Also the property. We are not concentrating right now on the property, but let's confine our discussion to the relation as far as the absence is concerned. So we kind of have studied the three concepts we wanted to study: limitation, determination, and absence. With the help of all these, we are going to read the final definition of pervasion, and here is the translation we have already seen. Thank you very much, and we shall meet again.